Now let's talk about the risks or headwinds, if you like, to doing business in Africa. Number one is corruption. I'm sure you guessed that, the C word. Corruption creates inefficiencies, which provide undue advantages to vested interests, which in turn makes it very difficult for new businesses to thrive. This leads to a lack of investment, which is needed to boost the physical and human capital stock in the country. Number two, infrastructure. Weak infrastructure increases the cost of doing business in Africa, which makes it very difficult for African companies to compete on a global scale, which in turn prevents Africa from building the necessary productive capacity which is required to achieve a diverse economic base. Permit me to use our nation as an example. We have a population of 180 million people with a power capacity the same as Hungary in Europe, with a population of 10 million people. Number three, bureaucracy and ease of doing business. The institutional environment in Africa, talking about the rule of law, the freedom of the press, independence of the judiciary, and the general business environment remain low and weak, according to the well-known institutional rankings, such as the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business rankings. Whilst it is possible to set up a business in 2 days in Rwanda, which is good, it can take well over a year in many African countries. The fourth point on headwinds is cyclicality. Africa, unfortunately, continues to be prone to externalities, like we have all witnessed over the course of the past 12 months. The continent is very much exposed to a commodity boom and bust cycle, as well as global interest rate cycles, which sometimes leads to capital flights and financial shocks. Finally, let's talk about the opportunities that exist in Africa. Permit me to say that there is no one-size-that-fits-all strategy for doing business in Africa. Even though the continent is the common denominator, each country has its own unique history, socio-economic and political system, and culture. There is very little that can be considered definitive when doing business in our continent. Moreover, through hindsight, anecdotal stories, observation, and experience, it is possible to arrive at some fundamental, critical principles which could possibly assist in formulating insights that support doing business in Africa. Here are 5 opportunities that exist in Africa today, amongst a few others. Number one, manufacturing. Furniture manufacturing in Western and Central Africa, where there is a lot of timber from the expansive rain, can be viable. Biotechnology development to manufacture drugs and diagnostic will require more capital investments, but returns exist to justify these. Number two, mining. Africa is host to a multitude of minerals. They are underexplored and underdeveloped. This should offer significant volume growth over the next decade. Whilst the challenges are numerous and will require deep pockets of capital, reserves of patience, and relationships with stakeholders to overcome, the sector is perhaps one of the least penetrated in the continent. Number three, healthcare. Despite the complexities of the problems and challenges of healthcare in Africa, this sector represents many business opportunities for astute local and global entrepreneurs and corporations. Some of these include, but are not limited to the following: pharmaceuticals, to manufacture and supply drugs required for the treatment of HIV, malaria, and other diseases. Number two, manufacture and distribution of treated mosquito nets, the provision of healthcare insurance, building hospitals and well-equipped healthcare delivery centers, and healthcare training. Number four opportunity, agriculture, livestock, and agro-businesses. Africa's food needs are massive, and if you layer the globally increasing demand for food, particularly from India and China, it is easy to see how big this opportunity is. Africa has abundant arable land and labor, which, with sound policies and technology, could be translated into greatly increased production, increased incomes, and food security. Opportunities here include fertilizer manufacturing and export, developing irrigation systems, and developing artificial fish ponds from existing rivers and freshwater lakes to grow and export fish. The fifth opportunity is power. The power sector in Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, offers a unique combination of transformative potential and attractive investment opportunity. The inadequacy of electricity supply is a fact of life in nearly every sub-Saharan country. Furthermore, in most countries, electricity is provided by expensive diesel generators with prices ranging from 3 to 6 times what grid consumers pay across the world. Our dear country is a clear example of this. As a result, many Africa-based industries and manufacturing sectors are uncompetitive, and this slows job growth. It drags down annual GDP growth, as alluded to earlier. The high penetration of generators, however, demonstrates that African businesses and consumers are willing to pay for electricity. This creates opportunities across the entire power sector value chain in sub-Saharan Africa, especially as growth rates in other regions stagnate. We could spend the entire rest of the session on this topic of power alone, but permit me to state the obvious. If structured properly, the sector presents great investment opportunities across the continent. In conclusion, in considering doing business in Africa, and in particular in the booming power and related infrastructure markets, the potential is plain to see. However, the challenges to procure finance, the challenges to procure, finance, deliver, and operate successful infrastructure assets and services are equally plain to see. To be fair, none of these issues are intrinsically African, or for that matter, insurmountable, but their undoubted prevalence in many of Africa's countries, 55 of them, increases the challenges of doing business in these African countries. The savvy investor who can navigate these will find it a rewarding place to do business. I thank you for listening.